The desert dawn carried a cold wind down from the high ridges, sweeping through the canyons like a whisper from a forgotten world. The sun had not yet risen, but the land already glowed with that faint copper light that clung to the rocks before daybreak. Somewhere between those rust-colored cliffs, a lone horse stirred up dust as it moved along an abandoned trail. Guided by a rider who seemed carved from the very stone around him, he rode silently, shoulders broad, chest bare except for worn leather straps and old tribal beads that clattered softly against his skin. His face was stern, weathered by seasons of war, exile, and wandering. His long hair swept back with the wind, a reminder of the battles he had survived. The trail had no destination on any map. It was a road he followed because there was nowhere left to return to. He had spent a decade living far from his people, far from camps, far from songs and voices, a decade away from the presence of any woman. His life had become a long march through emptiness, surviving on hunting, memory, and silence. His tribe had once known him as a respected warrior, but everything had changed. Betrayal scattered the people he loved. He left rather than fight his own blood. For years, he believed he would die out there alone. Some nights, he slept beneath the cold stars with a bow across his chest, waiting for danger that never came. Other nights, he sat by a small fire watching sparks float up into the darkness, wondering if somewhere someone still remembered his name. The world had shifted while he was gone. New settlers pushed into valleys he once guarded. Towns appeared near the rivers, where his ancestors hunted. Trails grew busy, and his absence left no trace. When he rode into the edge of civilization again, he expected nothing more than a glimpse of smoke from a distant cabin or the echo of distant gunfire. He did not expect to find a gathering. He stopped his horse at the rise of a hill and looked down at a wide clearing near a dusty frontier town. Wagons circled like a temporary fort. Ropes hung with cloth banners swayed in the wind. Lanterns dangled from wagon rails, lighting faces filled with music, chatter, and nervous excitement. It was not a festival. It was a wedding. The warrior watched from a distance, hidden among tall rocks. He saw men dressed in rugged coats, watchers carrying rifles, and modest folk standing in rows as if waiting for something sacred to begin. He saw a preacher unfold a small book. Men adjusted their hats. Women clutched shawls around their shoulders as the cold evening settled in. Then, he saw her. She stood at the center of the crowd, dressed in a simple frontier gown stitched together from fabric that looked as travel-worn as her spirit. Her hair fell loose at her shoulders, not styled like the wealthy women of the eastern cities, but tied back softly, as though she never had the luxury to worry about appearances. Her eyes held a tired determination, like she carried the weight of a long journey or a harder past. She was not surrounded by family. No proud father stood beside her. No friends whispered encouragement. She stood alone, shoulders straight, facing a groom who did not seem to notice her sadness. The groom was a rancher, broad and rough-looking, with a coat made from tanned hide and the confident posture of a man who believed ownership meant possession. The way he looked at her held no warmth. It was the look of a man who believed he had purchased a life rather than earned a heart. The warrior narrowed his gaze. He had seen that look before in distant trading camps, where desperate souls exchanged dignity for survival. This woman was not marrying for love. Something forced her hand. Whether it was debt, loneliness, or fear, she was surrendering her future to a stranger. He felt the old pain rise in his chest, the same pain that chased him into exile. He had witnessed enough forced unions and broken spirits to recognize the truth. She did not want this life. Perhaps she had no choice. The preacher raised his hands. The guests fell silent. The wind carried every word clearly across the valley. The rancher stepped closer to the bride, ready to speak vows that had no meaning. She lowered her eyes, not raising her voice, not fighting back. Simply accepting fate, the warrior turned away, tightening his grip on the reins as if reminding himself to leave. He had stayed away from people for years. Their problems were not his. Their laws did not concern him. He had no right to intervene. Yet as he pulled his horse around, he heard something faint. A soft breath, a quiet tremor in her voice. A plea no one else noticed. She whispered, barely loud enough for the wind to carry. "Someone help me." The words struck him like an arrow to the heart. They reminded him of a voice from long ago, a voice he failed to protect, a voice that haunted his dreams each night he slept under the stars. He could not ride away. The past held him still. The crowd began to applaud, believing the ceremony was sealed. The rancher reached out to claim her hand. The warrior moved before he could think. His horse thundered down the slope, kicking loose stones into the valley. People turned, startled, stepping away as dust and wind swept around them. The preacher dropped his book. The rancher reached for his revolver. But the warrior's bow was faster. He drew a single arrow and aimed with steady hands, not to harm, but to warn. The point glimmered inches from the rancher's chest. The crowd held its breath. The warrior dismounted with the grace of someone trained from childhood. His boots hit the ground softly. He walked toward the bride, not rushing, not threatening, simply approaching with purpose. So fate had been waiting for this moment. The rancher shouted words of anger, demanding the outsider leave. Men raised weapons. Women backed away. The warrior ignored them. He stopped before the bride. She looked up at him, eyes filled with shock, fear, and something deeper. Not recognition, but hope. He spoke quietly, his voice rough from years of silence. "I've not seen a woman in 10 years. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He reached out his hand, not to claim her, but to offer a choice. The bride hesitated, lips trembling, torn between two worlds. The rancher yelled at her to obey. The warrior waited, still as stone. Finally, she placed her hand in his. A hush fell over the valley. The preacher, trembling, realized this was no ordinary union. Something ancient stirred in the air, something bound not by law or trade, but by survival, freedom, and destiny. With reluctant words, he blessed the union. Not understanding what forces he witnessed, the warrior stepped closer to the bride, eyes locked with hers, voice low. "If you walk with me, your life will change forever." The bride swallowed, heart racing, unsure of her future. Yet unable to let go, he leaned in, kissed her softly, sealing a bond before anyone could stop it. And that was when everything truly began. Because the man she chose carried a past more dangerous than anyone in that valley understood. The enemies he left behind in the wilderness were already hunting him. The moment he touched her hand, her life became part of that danger, and the shadows of his past began to rise. Their journey was only beginning. The crowd stood frozen, caught between fear and disbelief, as the warrior guided the newly claimed bride away from the circle of wagons. The rancher tried to follow, but rifles from other men rose instinctively. Not out of loyalty to the warrior, but out of sheer uncertainty. No one understood whether this was a rescue, a threat, or something far older than either. The preacher slowly closed his book, hands shaking as he muttered nervous prayers. Unsure if he had just blessed a marriage or witnessed a storm gathering. The warrior did not look back. He walked toward the canyon trail where his horse waited, holding the woman's hand as if he feared she might disappear if he let go. She moved in silence, steps unsure, as though she was still deciding whether to stay beside him or retreat to the safety she once believed she needed. Once they reached the shade of the rocks, he stopped. The horse shifted its weight, snorting softly. Wind rustled dry weeds at their feet. The woman finally spoke, her voice unsteady. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." He turned his face toward the rising light, eyes narrowed against the sun. For a moment, he did not answer. His thoughts drifted to memories buried deep, memories of another woman standing alone, looking at him with the same eyes, pleading for protection he failed to give. The ghost of that moment traveled with him through every year of exile. "I do not leave someone who asks for help," he said quietly. "Not again." She searched his expression, noticing the weight he carried but unable to name it. There was something broken in him, something forged in fire long before she was ever part of his story. "My life was never easy," she said, glancing back toward the camp. "Marrying him wasn't what I wanted. It was just the only thing left." He promised food and shelter in exchange for becoming his wife. I wasn't wanted anywhere else. He studied her with deep attention. You were not meant to stand beside a man who sees you as payment. She hugged herself as the morning breeze chilled her skin. Then what am I meant for? Where do I go now? He looked out across the barren ridges, as though the land itself might answer. He had not spoken to another soul in years, let alone shared responsibility for their safety. Bringing someone along meant slowing down, changing route, risking being found by the people who hunted him. He knew that once he chose to protect her, he would not abandon his word. He lifted his gaze to hers. You can travel with me until you choose a path. I will not force you to stay. She nodded slowly, though her fear had not faded. What are you running from? The muscles in his jaw tightened. He did not answer. He simply turned and began preparing the horse for two riders. She watched him with curiosity, sensing that behind his silence lived a story too heavy to speak. As he worked, she noticed the old scars on his shoulders. Some were thin marks from blades, others deep like wounds that took months to heal. They told a history of battles most men never lived long enough to survive. His body looked strong, but his spirit carried marks that ran deeper than any weapon could carve. She hesitated before speaking again. You said you haven't seen a woman in 10 years? Were you truly alone all that time? He lifted a woven pouch and tied it behind the saddle. I lived where no one else would go. Why? He paused, fingers resting on braided reins, eyes lowering like shadows pulling across his face. Tss. My people were torn apart. Some fought each other. Some joined men with guns. Some were taken. I left before I became part of their war. I did not want to kill those I grew up beside. She softened, realizing exile was not a choice, but a punishment born from mercy. He mounted the horse and offered his hand to help her climb up. When she settled behind him, she held on to the leather belt near his waist, unsure how close she was allowed to sit. The horse moved forward, descending the rocky trail that led away from town. Carrying them into open country, hours passed without words. The land stretched wide, filled with sagebrush, distant mesas, and lonely trails, untouched by settlers. The vast silence had always been his companion, but now he felt a presence behind him, small but undeniable, warming the space where isolation once lived. She finally broke the quiet. My parents died on the trail last winter. I tried to make it to the mountains alone, but the cold took everything from me. When I reached the town, no one offered help unless I could give something in return. That rancher wasn't cruel at first. He just saw opportunity, but I knew if I married him, I'd never be free. He nodded once. Freedom is something you do not trade. A hawk circled above them. Dust drifted behind the horse's hooves. The land seemed endless, yet the warrior kept checking the horizon as though expecting shadows to rise from it. She noticed. You keep looking behind us. Is someone following? He did not hide his concern. There are men who want me dead. They hunt everywhere I go. When I left camp, I left with secrets powerful men want to bury. If they find me, they will not care who is beside me. Her breath caught. So I am in danger because I came with you. No, he said strongly. You are safer here than anywhere you stood this morning. But you must understand the life you chose. The horse continued deeper into the canyons. She tightened her grip on his belt, not out of fear of falling, but fear of what waited in the shadows of his past. What happened to your tribe? She asked. He looked ahead, voice low. There was a leader who promised power in exchange for blood. Some believed him. Some resisted. I refused to swear loyalty to a man who sacrificed his own people to gain control of neighboring lands. Those who followed him hunted those who did not. I left before they forced me to choose sides. The man who leads them still believes I hold something that belongs to him. I do not, but he will not stop until he is sure. She felt her heartbeat quickened. Will he come after us? He always does. They traveled until the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across red stone. Finally, he stopped near a sheltered hollow beneath an overhang of rock. He helped her down from the horse and gathered wood for a small fire. She sat near the warmth, rubbing her hands together, lost in new questions. The flames painted his features with shifting gold, making him look both alive and haunted at the same time. He ate only a small portion of dried meat. She noticed he gave her more than he kept for himself. As darkness settled, coyotes called from distant ridges. She looked at him, feeling a strange mixture of safety and uncertainty. "You saved me today," she whispered. "But what if I become a burden to you?" He stared into the fire, answering without hesitation. "A burden is someone you carry without choice. You are someone I chose to protect." Her eyes softened. No one had chosen her in a long time. Night deepened. The stars opened above them in a wide silver arc. Winds rolled through the canyon, carrying the faint smell of pine from far mountains. She watched him as his silhouette rested against a stone wall, bow within reach. He did not relax fully, even when his eyes closed. He listened to every sound around them, muscles ready to move. His life was not just survival, it was vigilance. She wrapped herself in a blanket and lay near the fire, unable to sleep. Questions filled her thoughts. Who had he loved before? Why did that memory haunt him? What did he carry that others wanted so desperately? And most of all, why did fate bring her to him on the very day she gave up hope? While she watched the stars, he opened his eyes again, staring into the night as if expecting a figure to appear in the dark, far beyond the canyon. Horse hooves moved across hard ground. A trail of riders followed distant tracks, led by a figure cloaked in feathers and bone. Their torches flickered like sparks chasing prey. They had found signs of the warrior, and they were getting closer. The firewood crackled under the cold night air, while the warrior sat awake, alert, staring into the distance. He heard noises that most people would mistake for wind or coyotes. His ears picked out the rhythm of hooves, the faint clink of metal. Riders traveled the night with purpose, too silent for honest men. He knew exactly who they were. The woman curled under her blanket, unaware of the shadow edging closer to her new life. She trusted him because he saved her, but trust did not erase fear. Her thoughts kept circling the question she dared not speak again. What would become of them now? She had taken her chance to escape one kind of danger, only to land in the path of another. She finally found her voice. "When you say they are hunting you, who are they really?" He did not turn. He scanned the ridgelines as he answered. "Men who follow a leader that believes he is a king. He wants every tribe under his control. He wants land and warriors and fear." She shivered. "And you refused him." The warrior nodded. "He wanted my loyalty, but also something else. Something I would never give." "What is that?" He looked at her now, eyes reflecting firelight and sorrow. "Honor can be stolen. Trust can be bought. But freedom must be defended. I chose freedom. That makes me a threat to him. And anyone near me becomes a target too." Her hands tightened around the blanket. "You think they already know about me? They will not care who you are. They will only see you beside me." The flames danced lower, then steadied. She swallowed her worry. If she showed fear, perhaps it would make her seem weak. And weakness was something she had battled her whole life. "I am not afraid to fight for my own life," she said quietly. "I have been doing that for a long time." A flicker of admiration crossed his face, but he did not smile. Smiles belonged to safer worlds. The wind shifted. He stood, bow already in hand. "Stay here." Before she could speak, he vanished into the darkness like a shadow disappearing into deeper night. She listened, heart pounding. Minutes felt longer than years, rustling, a soft grunt. Hooves, scraping rock. She wanted to move closer, but forced herself still. The night swallowed every sound. Finally, he emerged again, moving low, leading his horse. "They are near," he said. "We must leave before they reach the canyon opening." She stood, gathering her blanket and stepping quickly toward him. "Where do we go?" "North. The mountains will slow them. That might give us time." As they rode, the moon cast light over the land, turning every rock into a possible hiding figure. She pressed her cheek near his back to steady herself on the horse. He could feel her trembling, though she tried to hide it. He said nothing. Some fears eased only with distance. Hours passed. Dawn began to push against the sky with its pale gray light. They stopped near a narrow ridge overlooking a deep valley. Pines gathered near a river far below. The warrior scanned the horizon again. "We cannot stay long," he said, "but the horse needs rest." She stepped down, stretching her legs. The river below glimmered with the first signs of day. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel hope. Maybe they could outrun danger. Maybe life still had room for a future she'd never imagined before. Yet the warrior's expression still carried tension. His past would not let him breathe. She rested on a rock while he gathered water from a seat between stones. It felt strange to have someone care for her survival. Most of the world had been willing to let her disappear. She wanted to understand the man protecting her. Not just the warrior he had become, but the boy he once was. "What was your life like before all of this?" she asked. He paused, water dripping from his hands. There were mornings filled with laughter, evenings with songs and stories. "My mother told me I was meant to lead one day, not with force, but with heart." What happened to her? Pain crossed his features like a knife. A raid. They came for land and took lives instead. The woman lowered her eyes, feeling the weight of his loss. "So you have been alone ever since, in one way or another?" She walked closer, voice soft. "I am sorry." He nodded once, not wanting pity. His heart was armor. Armor forged from grief. He mounted the horse again and offered his hand. "We go." As they rode deeper into the mountains, the trail became harder, stones knocking against the horse's hooves. Cold winds swept down from snowy peaks. She leaned into him for warmth. Every sound seemed to carry meaning. Every gust of wind might hide footsteps behind it. Finally, he stopped near a narrow cave hidden between boulders. Moss and brush grew thick enough to conceal an entrance. He led the horse inside first, then guided her close. "We will rest until night returns," he said. "They will search the open ground. Here we stay out of sight." Inside, the cave smelled of age and damp stone. The woman sat while he blocked the entrance with loose brush. She watched him silently. He moved with the skill of someone who had lived everywhere except a home. She spoke softly. "Do you trust me?" He froze. The question cut deeper than most blades. "No. I trust that your heart is honest," he said. "But trust is something I have not given in a long time." She nodded, understanding more than he realized. Trust was the rarest thing in the frontier. More valuable than gold, more dangerous to share. "Then I will show you I deserve it," she whispered. He sat across from her, bow at his side. The firelight in the cave was faint, but enough to see each other's faces. She noticed that, even when still, his muscles remained tense, ready to spring like a coiled mountain cat. Silence settled between them. Not cold silence, a silence of unspoken thoughts. Hours passed in restless half-sleep. She woke now and then to the sound of him moving, checking the cave opening. Listening to the world beyond, outside the riders searched. Torches flickered through the trees. Their leader raised a bone ornament carved with tribal symbols. His voice carried chants through the forest, calling to spirits for guidance. He would find the tracks again. He always did. Back inside the cave, the warrior wiped dust from an old leather pouch he carried at his side. The woman noticed how carefully he handled it. "Is that why they hunt you?" she asked. "Whatever is in that pouch?" He looked down at it, jaw tight. "Inside is a piece of our tribe's past. A small stone, carved with the symbols of leadership. The war chief wants it. He believes that stone gives him claim to all the land our people ever walked, and you kept it from him. I did not take it to own anything. I took it to keep it sacred. My mother said it must never be used to rule through fear. If the wrong hands hold it, our history becomes a weapon." She stared at him, realization dawning. "So you carry a burden that could change the future of many." "It was never meant to be mine," he said quietly. "But until someone worthy rises, I must keep it safe." The woman reached toward him, but stopped before her hand made contact. She admired his loyalty, even when it cost him everything. Sacrifice shaped every step he took. A sudden shout echoed faintly from outside. Both of them stiffened. Riders were near again. The warrior doused the small glow of the fire with a swift motion. The cave dropped into near darkness. He motioned for her to stay quiet. Shadows moved past the entrance, only a few feet away. Voices exchanged angry commands. Hoofbeats scraped rock. She clutched the blanket to her mouth to keep from gasping. The warrior remained crouched, bow drawn, every sinew tense. He would fight to the last breath if they were discovered. The riders paused. One dismounted. Footsteps approached the brush-covered opening. The woman's heart hammered as she braced for the worst. But then, another voice called from afar and the footsteps retreated. The warriors remounted and the group moved on, their torches fading into the woods. When silence returned, she finally breathed. "How long can we keep running?" she whispered. "As long as we must," he answered. "But I know running cannot last forever. They will drive us into a corner one day. When that happens, only courage will decide who walks away." She shivered, not from cold this time. He looked at her fully, as if seeing her strength rise to meet his struggle. "You asked earlier what you were meant for. I do not know yet. But I do know this. You are not meaningless. The world tried to break you and failed. That makes you stronger than you believe." Her eyes glimmered with a mix of fright and growing resolve. Outside, a raven croaked loudly into the wind, a warning carried from the distant peaks. The hunt was far from over, and fate was tightening its grip around both of their lives. The next morning arrived without warmth. Pale gray light poured into the cave like a warning instead of a blessing. The woman woke to the sound of the warrior fastening his bow and tightening the leather straps across his chest. His movements were quiet and deliberate, like a man preparing not just for a journey, but for a confrontation he could feel closing in. She sat up slowly. "Did they leave?" He kept his eyes on the entrance. "They passed us last night, but they will realize their mistake. They will turn back." Her stomach tightened. "Then we should keep moving," shook his head. "If we move now, we leave tracks. The ground is soft from the night air. We wait until sun dries the soil. Then we travel across stone where tracks will fade." She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "And if they find us before then?" "They will not find you," he said firmly, then added with quieter certainty, "Not while I still draw breath." Those words steadied her, yet at the same time she understood them too deeply. He was prepared to die for a duty he never asked for, and for a woman he barely knew. That kind of loyalty was rare, almost dangerous, because it demanded something in return. She wondered if she could ever carry that kind of faith for him. After hours of waiting, they slipped from the cave and continued north. The land transitioned from red stone and sand to thicker pine forests where shadows layered like curtains. The trees offered cover, but they also offered places to hide enemies. The warrior's gaze swept constantly, watching both trail and sky. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley with a small abandoned cabin near a creek. Smoke stains on the chimney meant someone once lived there, but the roof sagged and broken fence posts leaned like tired bones. The woman pointed toward it. "Maybe we can rest there a while. They might not think anyone would hide somewhere so exposed." Considered it, then agreed. "We stay until nightfall. Then we move again." They approached carefully. He circled the cabin first, studying tracks, reading soil, as if it spoke a language only he understood. Inside, dust coated the floor. A few overturned crates lay near the hearth, along with a forgotten deer pelt. She brushed her fingers across the wood, imagining the last hands that lived there and what drove them away. "People leave places like this because the land asks for more than they can give," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Do you ever wish you had stayed somewhere longer?" she asked. He paused before answering. "Every place I stayed, trouble followed. I stopped wishing." She lowered her eyes. His life wasn't a path. It was a storm that kept moving. He gathered wood outside, while she cleaned the inside of the cabin. When he returned, she was sweeping dust aside with an old branch. It was not her home. Yet she moved as though she needed to make it livable, even if only for a few hours. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "Because if I am going to survive each day, I need to act like each place matters, even if it doesn't last." That answer struck him harder than she realized. Later, they sat near the hearth, sharing a simple meal of dried berries and roots. She finally dared ask the question that sat heavy between them. "Do you think your tribe still lives?" He leaned back, staring into the unlit fireplace. "Some are alive. Some hide near distant rivers. Some fight beside the leader who hunts me. But the ones I knew best are gone. Do you ever think about returning, if things were different?" He turned toward her with a quiet ache in his voice. A man lost for 10 years cannot return as the man he was. The ground remembers you, but the people change. She took a slow breath. "Maybe that is why you found me. Maybe I am part of your return." His eyes softened, but before he could speak, the sound of snapping branches outside cut through their moment. He rose instantly, bow in hand. No wind blew strong enough to break branches. The woman stood behind him, breath held. Voices moved through the trees. 2 riders dismounted near the fence line. They carried rifles and wore coats with fringed sleeves and heavy boots, not tribal attire. These were frontier gunmen, hired trackers, men who worked for the highest bidder. One knelt, touching the soil near hoof tracks. "Fresh prints," the man muttered. "He's not far." The warrior whispered to her, "They are not from my people. They work for towns. That rancher you escaped may have sent them." Her heart dropped. Trouble came from both past and present. He stepped back from the doorway and motioned for her to climb through a loose board in the back wall. She slipped through, crouching low behind broken timber while he stayed near the front. One rider approached the cabin slowly, gun pointed ahead. "You inside. Show yourself." The warrior waited, body steady. He did not reveal himself. The rider edged closer. Unaware of how close he was to danger, the woman watched from the back as the second rider circled wide, heading toward the creek. He would soon see the horse tracks and know they were nearby. She whispered through the cracks in the wood. "We need to go now." "Not yet," he answered. "If we run while both stand, they will shoot." The first rider stepped up to the doorframe. His hand reached for the wood in a single controlled motion. The warrior grabbed the man by the coat and pulled him inside, slamming him to the ground, pressing a blade against his throat. The man choked, struggling under the weight of a silent threat. The warrior did not speak. He did not kill. He simply held him captive long enough to keep control. But the second rider saw movement and raised his rifle. The woman gasped. "Behind you." The warrior spun, pushing the first rider aside as the gun fired. The bullet struck wood, splintering shards across the floor. The warrior dove behind a table, drawing his bow. The woman crawled back toward the wall, heart pounding. The second rider fired again, missing by inches. The warrior released an arrow that struck the man's shoulder, sending him to one knee. He did not shoot a killing blow. He only shot to disable, but now both riders shouted, calling for others hidden in the forest. More gunmen. More enemies. The warrior grabbed the woman's hand and pulled her toward the back of the cabin. They fled through the gap, running toward the trees. The wounded rider fired blindly at their backs, bullets slicing through branches. They ran until the sound of gunfire faded into distance, stopping only when they reached the riverbank. Both gasped for breath. She bent over, gripping her knees. "This will never stop." "It will," he answered, though his voice carried doubt. "But not yet." They crossed the river, water freezing around their boots. Each step pushed them deeper into the wilderness. They climbed until they reached a rocky ledge overlooking a valley, filled with pine and mist. But something changed in the warrior's expression. He stared toward the distant cliffs with recognition and dread. "What is it?" she asked. "That ridge marks the border of land once held by my tribe. If we cross it, we step into territory where old loyalties and old enemies both wait. Is that bad? It means the world ahead will not let us stay hidden. It will demand choices." Her breath slowed as she realized they were walking straight toward the past he had spent a decade avoiding. The sky darkened with fast-moving clouds. Storm winds rose, bending treetops. Thunder rolled across the mountains like drums. Below them, through sheets of rain, figures appeared in the valley. Not gunmen, not settlers, warriors on horseback, painted, armed, moving in formation. His people. Some who might welcome him. Some who might kill him. The woman stood close to him, rain dripping from her hair. Fear and hope mixing in her eyes, she whispered, "Whatever comes, I will not leave your side." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the valley of waiting riders. The storm had arrived, and there was no turning back. Rain poured across the mountains in long, silver sheets as the warrior and the woman stood together on the ridge, staring down at the riders gathering in the valley. Lightning lit the sky again, revealing painted faces, feathers tied to spears, and horses trained for battle. Their presence brought a strange mixture of familiarity and dread. These were men of his blood. Time and war had reshaped them into something he was not sure he recognized anymore. The woman stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm. He did not pull away. For the first time since she met him, he looked uncertain. It's like a man standing between past and future with no clear place to belong. She studied his face and saw something new. He was not afraid of death or battle. He was afraid of being welcomed or rejected by the people he once called his own. "What do we do now?" she asked. He took a slow breath. "We go down there together. If they choose peace, we stay. If they choose war, we leave. And if they choose you," she whispered. He glanced sideways, then rested his hand over hers. "Then they must accept who stands beside me." They descended the rocky path toward the valley. Each step echoed with the sound of dripping water and distant hooves shifting in the mud. The moment they reached flat ground, riders moved to surround them in a wide circle. No one attacked. They simply watched an older warrior separated from the group. His hair was braided with white strands, his chest marked with paint that carried spiritual meaning. His eyes held both sadness and recognition. "You return after seasons of wandering," the elder said, "and you bring someone not of our blood. Why?" The warrior stood tall. "I return because running no longer protects what I carry. I return because a person should not be hunted without reason." Murmurs swept through the riders. The elder stared at him, gaze sharp. "The one who seeks you still rules the southern valley? His men came through our borders 2 nights ago asking if we had seen you. And what did you tell them?" the warrior asked. "That your shadow still walks," the elder replied. "But your heart does not belong to any land." Another rider stepped forward, younger, face painted in harsh colors. His voice rose with accusation. "You left when we needed you. You took the sacred stone and vanished. Why should we trust you now?" The warrior did not raise his voice. He simply reached into the pouch tied to his belt and pulled out the carved stone. Rain washed over its ancient symbols, making them shine in the stormlight. "I did not take this to lead," he said. "I took it to keep it from becoming a weapon. If you want peace, it belongs to the tribe again. If you want power, you will have to kill me." The riders stared at the stone, not with greed, but with reverence. The elder stepped forward, touching it gently. "You carried this burden alone." "More than any of us should have asked of you," the elder said. "And now you return not as a wanderer, but as someone willing to stand for the people again." The young challenger lowered his head, understanding slowly. The woman watched with steady breath, unsure what they would decide. She had no place here except the one he chose for her. That truth frightened her, but she refused to step back. Finally, the elder looked at her. "You travel with him, though danger follows him." "Why?" she answered with no hesitation. "Because he saved me when no one else cared. Because I choose a life with meaning. Because he deserves someone who stands beside him, not behind him." The elder nodded. "Then you are welcome here, if he is." The circle slowly widened, no longer trapping them. Torches lowered. Horses relaxed. The war drums in the wind softened to a quiet rhythm. The tribe accepted them, not because he demanded it, but because he returned with humility instead of pride. With dawn came clearer skies and warmth rising from the wet earth. They were given a sheltered place near the river and blankets woven from soft fur. Tribe members brought food, roots, and corn, not as offerings to a stranger, but as gestures of respect. The woman helped gather firewood with others, learning their ways while children stared at her with wide, curious eyes. As days passed, no riders came from the valley. No shadows rose from the hills. The men who hunted them lost the trail under rain and mountain stone. The threat faded like smoke carried away on the wind. Some nights, the tribe sat around large fires, sharing songs and stories of ancestors. The warrior sat beside the woman, listening to songs he once knew, but had forgotten how to sing. The elders spoke of rebuilding, not conquering. They wanted leaders who chose peace over dominance. The carved stone now rested in the hands of the council, no longer a burden for one man alone. One evening, when the sun set in warm bands of orange and gold across the river, the woman stood with him on a quiet rise overlooking the camp. She watched children play near the water, watched smoke curl from cooking fires, watched a community live without fear. "You belong here," she said softly. He looked at her, voice steady. "Not because of blood, because of purpose," she smiled. "And what is your purpose now?" He took her hand, fingers warm and gentle. "To stop walking alone, to build something that lasts longer than regret." Her smile grew tender. For the first time, he felt not like someone who survived by chance, but someone who was part of a future that finally welcomed her. She rested her head against his shoulder. "Then I will stay with you," she said. "Not because you chose me, but because I choose you too." He wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. The river moved below them, steady as a heartbeat. The wind carried no whispers of danger anymore. The tribe did not need a king. They needed unity. And unity began with people who learned to stop fighting ghosts. When the moon rose high, the elder approached them quietly. He placed a woven cloth over their joined hands, a gesture of blessing and acceptance. "You began your bond on a valley floor filled with fear," the elder said. "Let it continue here with hope instead." The warrior looked into the woman's eyes, seeing not the desperate stranger he rescued, but the partner who stood through storms, fear, and uncertainty. She looked back, seeing not an isolated wanderer, but a man who risked everything to protect what mattered. He kissed her gently beneath the starlight. Not as a claim, not as a promise born of desperation, but as a vow shaped by choice and shared strength. They were no longer running. They were home. Together, they watched the firelight glow across the camp. Knowing the world beyond the mountains carried challenges, but they would face them as one. The land was still wild, still dangerous, still full of shifting borders and uncertain seasons, yet for the first time, their lives felt like they belonged to something greater than survival. And in that quiet place between night and dawn, the warrior who had not seen a woman in 10 long years finally found not just companionship, but a future worth living for.